Dave, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. How about on my side?
Yeah, you're loud and clear. Dave Prodan, welcome to the Boardroom Podcast. Good morning, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Good morning, Scott.
How did I do? How do you start your podcast, Dave? How does it kick off?
Uh I kind of think people that do the cold open where they're just chatting about something and then the host rolls in is always pretty smooth. I never do that. I just kind of just
Yeah.
I kind of have to like clap my hands and then go, okay, I gotta like go into my little intro.
Right, right. Okay. Well, let me do a little intro. Dave Prodan with the WSL and a dear friend of mine, a good friend of mine. Thanks for being a part of this and accepting my invitation to chat a little bit. A little bit of backstory. I was thinking about it yesterday. I feel like you've been with the WSL since the early 2000s, since the Rabbit Bartholomew Dream Tour era. Where and when did you start this whole deal?
Yeah, I graduated from UCSB in geez, it was 2005, and then I went back to work. I was working at the Rip Curl Surf Center in San Clemente. I worked there in high school and college, and then started writing for Evan Slater at Surfing Magazine while I was there, and then took a unpaid telecommute media internship at the ASP because I thought it looked good on the resume. So that was like October 2005, and then I got hired as the regional media guy in like kind of March 2006. So yeah, I think this is like I'm in the middle of my 20th year there. It's changed a lot, and yeah, as you said, when I started, Bugs was the president, and so and I was a full Bugs acolyte even before I got to work there. So that was really cool.
Yeah, Bugs is sort of right in my wheelhouse too, as far as when I was a kid, he was the hot pro surfer that I looked up to. And so I feel you there. But so are you the oldest guy in the building at the WSL? It feels like, I mean, not oldest, but oldest tenure, like you've been there the longest.
No, like I'm close, I guess, but like Graham Stapleberg, he's our president of tours. He probably outranks me. I think I got him on consecutive years because he was
Yeah.
there and then he went to Billabong and then he's come back. And then, folks like Renato Hickel, he's been there. He's like our deputy commissioner, tour manager, former head judge. So yeah, if I have questions, I usually go to them. And then I keep Al Hunt on speed dial if I've got any real questions. That Al's retired, but I think he's been there a long time. And then I have to mention Meg Bernardo. She was the head of ASP North America. She was my boss when I started, and she'd been there for decades. She'd worked with PT and Kanga and everybody, and had seen everything, and was like really my rabbi in a lot of ways, like trying to navigate this when I started. And she's awesome, and I still get to talk to her a lot too.
That's cool. Those are some interesting names and a lot of salt still in the building. Let's just get into it here, right? There's big changes that have occurred. Everyone that's a surf fan seems to be very excited, including myself. And I'll just kind of break it down. The final five in 2026 is no longer, and the mid-year cut has been eliminated in 2026. There will be no elimination opening round in 26. That tour will feature just 12 events with a late season quote unquote playoff. It will start at Bells Beach in April. It will end at Pipeline in December. And the pipe points are going to be weighted at 150%. And world titles will once again be decided by cumulative points rather than a single day shootout. Um, I guess the first place to start is what kind of feedback are you getting in this since the week of announcing this?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you mentioned we should hop on a podcast last week, I was, in the depths of like getting this kind of moving across the last few yards there with certain stakeholders. And I'm like, "Ooh, all right. Well, when I announce this, I'll text Scott and be like, oh yeah, we'll have some stuff to talk about." But yeah, the feedback's been really, really positive. And I think that there's a lot of folks that worked on this for a long time, and obviously our new CEO Ryan Crosby, he's led a lot of work just with the surfers themselves. And at the end of the day, like, and I think this is something that I learned a long time ago, like the ASP or the WSL, or if you get to work here, it's a really cool job. But our job, as I see it, is like we steward a platform for the world's best surfing, and we are not the stars. Like they're the stars, and if they believe in the platform and they perform on the platform, we win anyway. And so, it's not that we haven't been talking to the surfers. That's always a conversation, but I think they've come front and center in terms of wanting to kind of work through what that platform looks like and how it works. And to be fair, like, I think the finals format did a lot of awesome things as well. I think we saw some of the best surfing we've ever seen. We've certainly seen some of the most exciting stuff we've ever seen. And I think this update kind of combines elements of the old and the new in a way that makes a ton of sense. So yeah, at the end of the day, the surfers are our primary stakeholder, and if they believe in it, then I think we're succeeding. And it seems like the media and the fans and everyone else are pretty pleased with it. And if we can kind of take the WSL and the WSL personnel out of the story and it becomes about the surfing, then I think our business wins.
Well, unfortunately, this podcast is going to be all about the
Yeah, mine too. I wrestle with that all the time. I'm like, well, yeah, all right. Yeah,
No, and that's why I thank you for taking this, because I know that you have other issues and concerns and responsibilities above and beyond sort of putting the WSL out there as you know the number one thing. I appreciate that the surfers are involved, and it kind of brings me to a couple of questions. First, um, I sense that you're referencing a contrast in leadership at the WSL. Can you speak a little bit about the new leadership versus the old leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you mentioned like I've been here for 20 years, so like the leadership's changed a lot. I think like the central idea of like this is the world's best surfing and this is what we're stewarding has always been there. I just think you get different takes on it, and sometimes it skews towards we're going to be really content focused, or we're going to be presenting it in this way, or we're going to be quieter and we're going to be presenting it that way. And it's changed a lot, and there's so many other variables. Like we work with communities and permit holders and sponsors and media rights. And at the end of the day, it is a business and it does need to sustain itself. And sometimes that runs kind of counter to what I think us as surf fans want to see, where it's like, well, why can't you just go to Chopu all the time or Indonesia or what? I want to see all that. And it has to be a balance. And I think, I don't want to speak for Ryan, but in my experience with him, he's very much about I want to do the work. I want to make this work. I want this to be the place where the best surfing in the world is happening in the live arena. And it doesn't need to be about me. It should be about the surfers. And I think we've seen that. Like he's been very resistant to doing press. I think we cattle prodded him out there to do a few things around this announcement, but I don't think you're going to be seeing a lot of it because at the end of the day, he and I think most folks at the WSL leadership and up and down the staff believe that if the fans and the media and everyone, they're talking about the surfers and the surfing, then that's a huge win for us.
Well, you mentioned also open dialogue that Ryan Crosby's been seeking between the surfers and the WSL. And there was this mention in Stab magazine. Sam McIntosh did a great interview with the CEO of the WSL, your boss, Ryan Crosby. And there was a mention of a surfers advisory council. And I'm kind of wondering, what is the makeup of this? Who are the surfers on it? How often do they meet? We used to have something sort of like this, for lack of a better phrase, a surfers union a few years ago. It sort of dissolved, but give me some insight into this surfers advisory council.
Totally, yeah. I mean, the surfers union, I think like geez, I'm going to screw this up now because there's so many acronyms in my head, but they're still around, and they're run by a great person, and they meet regularly on
Who
themselves
is that?
with
Who runs that?
Christian Becerra. He's been running it for a few years now. WPS, sorry,
Yeah.
it's early in the morning. World Professional Surfers, and they've been around for like they must have formed pretty quickly after I started, if not right around the same time. So they've been around for a long time, and it's great because they get to meet, they get to discuss things, in relative privacy, and then I've been a fly on the wall in some of those meetings. They are challenging sometimes, but like the surfers have a voice there, and then they come to the organization and we try to collaborate. When I started, we had a thing called the technical committee, which was really helpful because the few of us that were at the ASP at the time, we would meet with the surfers reps. We'd also meet with event licensee representatives. We'd also meet with a number of other surfers that were on this tech comm, and we discussed kind of the technical components of the sport, like judging criteria and rankings points and scheduling and kind of all those pieces. And it was awesome, right? Because at the end of the day, the CT surfers themselves are the world's best surfers, and that input is really invaluable for us to kind of keep, evolving the sport. That went away, I think, after a while, kind of around the acquisition period, probably, so about a decade ago. And yeah, I think when Ryan came on, we stood up something. It's not the technical committee, so to say, but the Surfer Advisory Council, which has the same intention. It's like, how do we create a more intimate setting with a representation of the CT surfers? They're surfers from all nations and like veterans, rookies, the whole nine. And it's great. We meet as much as we can. We just sort of started it. So we've had 2 in-person meetings and a bunch of kind of email meetings and stuff and Zoom meetings. But yeah, the goal is to kind of have that regularly to make sure that their feedback's being heard around the judging criteria or the way that the tour is being structured or how the rankings points are fitting in. And I would say that was super instrumental in kind of the announcement that just came out the last few days.
Well, I'm confused. Is the Surfers Advisory Council Christian Becerra's WPS, or is it like
It's
an
a smaller
offshoot of
group from
that?
the WPS. The WPS is basically the entire tour. And then this group's probably 12 or 15
And who's
surfers,
on this? Who's
Christian
on this?
included.
Who's on this
Oh,
group?
geez. I mean, I don't know if I'm supposed to name names, but I don't think it's that secret. It's like,
Well,
Jordy Smith, Jake Marshall,
right.
Gabby Bryan, John Florence, geez, I'm blanking here. Yago Dora, Tyler Wright. So yeah, like a range. I'm missing people for sure, but like, yeah, there's about 12, 15 of them. And again, like up and down the career spectrum from rookies on up, and then every nation's represented.
Well, I like that you mentioned a career spectrum, because first of all, I think of coaches. Like, our coaches included? Like, I think of like Mitch Thorson or Luke Egan, like guys that have been around forever, almost as long as you have.
Oh, way
And
longer than me.
I
Yeah.
know. And these guys have got great insight as well. I wonder if they're a part of the discussion, or if they're included in any of this.
It's funny you brought that up. We actually talked about whether we were going to include them specifically on the Surfer Advisory Council. It just started getting a little bit unwieldy from like a
Yeah.
logistics standpoint. But I would say that, like, I mean, I've always had really good relationships with a lot of them, and they're not shy on opinion, which I really appreciate. But I would say that in the last probably year or so, there's been a lot more dialogue between them informally, which has been really helpful, because whether we're developing the products we've already announced or developing kind of other products that we haven't announced yet, like, or refining the ones we have, like, yeah, as you said, they've got decades of competitive experience both in the singlet and on the beach, and they're super helpful when we're putting things paper.
Do you think that this is like, does their insight come in the form of just text messages, or is there like an agenda that they set, that you ask, that you say, hey, bring 5 bullet points to the next meeting? Let's not waste everyone's time. Let's kind of be streamlined here and do it right.
With the Surfer Advisory Council?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I wouldn't say it's the most formal thing on the planet, but definitely, like, we don't want to waste anyone's time. And I think, like, anyone that's worked with surfers knows it's like there's a herding cats element to it. So, I mean, I would say this personally and professionally, like, every time I've engaged with them, I've tried to, even as a comms person and then a brands person and a strategy person, it's like, if you're not engaging with someone in a way that's going to benefit them personally and professionally, you're just wasting their time, and the example I give is, we get like 50 requests a week for interviews with Kelly Slater or something like that. And I learned pretty quickly, like, he doesn't want to do 50 requests a week. He doesn't want to hear from me 50 times a week. But if the ones that are going to make a difference for him matter, then that's great. And I'll just bring those ones to him. And over time, that relationship develops in kind of a mutual respect way, because he knows that if I'm calling or emailing him, it's for something that's worth getting off the couch for, right? And I kind of use that same approach with the advisory council too. It's like, let's be organized. It's not a 6-hour meeting. It's a 2-hour meeting. Like, here's the agenda. Here's what we want you to bring thoughts to the table with. And yeah, it's been really productive in that way.
Well, Dave, switching gears a little bit, tell me about this reduced field, and especially events 10 and 11. Explain to me how this works, this pairing of the field for the last 2 events before pipeline.
Totally. Yeah, I think you described it pretty well. So, part of the big part of the change was we were able to reacquire that December permit at pipe. We didn't have that the last few years. So we've gotten that back. We've also gotten the IP for the Pipe Masters back, which is great. So the Pipe
Wow.
Masters is back on the championship tour. So that
Cool.
really unlocked a lot of the schedule thinking, where it's like, okay, now that we have this, we can really structure something that is going to finish at Pipe, which was a huge piece of feedback that we'd gotten from our surfers, and we'd certainly heard from the fans as well. And I mean, candidly, inside the building, we're all like, yeah, we want to finish at Pipe. Um, so when we went through that process, we're like, okay, we looked at the structural components of the permit at Pipe, and we said we cannot run a finals format here due to the permitting reasons. Okay, let's start exploring how that works. And so we came up with that calendar. I think you articulated it really well. Starting at Bells, we do Bells, Margaret River, Snapper Rocks, El Salvador, Saquarema, Jeffreys Bay, Tahiti, Cloudbreak, Trestles. That gets us to CT9. Now, CT9 is sort of the de facto cut, but it's not a cut in the sense of that's also CT qualification, which is what it's been over the last few years. It's more of a field reduction. So the top 2/3 after Trestles, they'll travel to Abu Dhabi and then Portugal. And then the entire field will come back to the Pipe Masters. And the reason we did that is we felt like, as the most revered event on tour, we wanted every surfer to have a chance at Pipe. And so everyone's coming back for that. The surfers that haven't made that cut at Trestles, they're going to have a shot at Pipe to requalify. Every surfer will be ranked out of their best 9 results. So if you've made the cut, you get 12 cracks at your best 9. If you didn't, you'll only have 10 shots at your best 9. And so there's a huge advantage to finishing higher up, not just rankings wise after Trestles, but you do get in with a shot if you want to perform at Pipe. And due to that reverence and the importance of the venue, as you said, the Pipe event's going to be worth 1.5 times the points.
Okay, very interesting. 12 shots at your best 9 scores and 10 shots at your best 9 events if you don't make the cut after Trestles. That helps kind of clarify things for me. So thanks for that. Hawaii, you've mentioned it has politics. It has forever. Um, I have no research based on this, but my gut sense is that the power brokers that have caused, for lack of a better phrase, political dust ups in the past in Hawaii, they don't seem to be as vocal. Again, this is just me going off of nothing other than a sense that I have. Have those people moved on, or is it easier to do business in Hawaii these days?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't have to be across that as much as some folks, like Graham Stapleberg in particular, but I think it does have to do with the idea that the role and purpose, or the internal understanding of the WSL, is stewarding a platform, compared to, maybe there were elements in the past where it felt like we were overreaching and we're like, we are everything surfing. We're the media, we're the sport, we're the talent, we're the fun. And I understand that, like, why we approached it that way, and there are certainly kind of elements outside of our control that forced us to kind of take on some of these roles. But at the end of the day, like, our role is stewarding this platform. It's a very cool one in the broader surfing ecosystem, and I think that transition does come with a lot of humility, which does help with community relations. And I think that over time, conversations with power brokers in all communities, specifically the North Shore, they understood that, hey, like, if we succeed, it's good for the community, it's good for the kids there, it's good for us being able to support, regional events in Hawaii, and international events in Hawaii, and giving everybody a shot at competing. And yeah, I think it has helped. It's not easy. I wouldn't say it's easy kind of anywhere we go, and we're always working with kind of the permit holders and the community members to do things in a way that not only makes sense for a global sport, but makes sense for the people on the ground too. So yeah, it's kind of a non-answer, but I would say it has felt better as well. I mean, even with some really, like, high profile community members there, like, reaching out to us and just wanting to talk and figure out how we can work together to help. So
Yeah, that's kind of what I sense, that there's more of hey, let's all kind of work together, as opposed to in the past there was, I don't know if it was a vocal minority or majority, but there seemed to be some people going, you know what, we don't even need you here. The place is crowded already. We got
right,
back-to-back traffic. Tourism's fine. And then now it seems like and again, I'm just basing this off of something that I
sure.
sense. Um, Along those lines, if you were a betting man, Dave, what odds would you put on John Florence returning to the tour in 26?
I mean, it's a good question. Betting odds, okay. I mean, I'd say 50-50. Like, I think something with all these sort of superstars, right, that are going, okay, cool, I'm going to take a step back or take a year off is the way I think about it is I think Kelly Slater, for all of his achievements, has shifted our Overton window on what we think a career on the CT should look like. Like, he's been on tour for 35 years or whatever it is, which is wild, right? And I kind of look at it and it's like, you get a Carissa Moore or a Steph Gilmore or a John Florence or Gabriel Medina. If you have them on tour for 10 years plus, winning multiple world titles, I think any sport would look at that as a huge victory, and go, that's awesome. But I think relative to kind of Kelly's, unprecedented and probably never to be replicated tenure on tour, everyone's like, well, man, we need to keep them on tour. But I don't know if that's right. And I think John's achieved a ton. I think he's still super competitive, and I think he's still a world-class surfer. And I know that he was involved in conversations in and around, the tour restructure for 2026 and beyond, as were, most surfers, if not all of them. And I think he's probably pretty happy with where it's landed. We'll see. We'll see when he gets back from his sailing trip.
Are there wild cards? Let's say he decides against it. But it would certainly be in the WSLs. And if, in fact, the WSL, which I believe is the case, is looking after surf fans' number one interest, we would want to see John Florence in, especially now that it's the Pipeline Masters. You have the IP back. Tell me about the potential for wild cards for people like Kelly and John Florence, if, in fact, they're both not on tour, of course, in 26.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there are wild cards built into the format. They're ultimately, the criteria for selecting them and the selection of them is ultimately under the commissioner's office, which is helmed by Jesse Miley Dyer. And so it does change. And it's interesting because this conversation has come up in the past because there's kind of two schools of thought, right? Where you go, let's not take pipe, for example, but let's just say it's lower trestles. And we say, okay, well, there's wild cards like a Kolohe Dino or a Dane Reynolds or somebody that's like, we would love to see this, or Bobby Martinez maybe in the past. It's like, we would love to see this as surf fans. But then there's also kind of the matriculation through the system, like who's next on the CS rankings kind of piece. And I think both of them have value. When we're talking about the 26 and beyond schedule, and you have world titles on the line potentially, and you have the number one seeds drawing wild cards, it's a little bit rough if you perform through the whole year. It's a tight title race. And instead of getting next on the CS, maybe from the Hawaii region, that is probably a great pipe surfer to begin with, you're drawing, John Florence or something. At that point, you're probably hoping, oh man, I wish I was like number 2 or number 3. I don't need this smoke so early in the event. So it's tough, right? Because, and I'd say the same thing on like the women's side, it's like, all right, well, I've worked really hard all season. It's a tight title race. Like, it's all coming down to pipe. And because I've performed so well, I'm drawing Moana Jones Wong or something. And you're like, God damn it. Like, what happened to me? So it's a conversation. It's one that the Surfer Advisory Council and the Commissioner's Office is working on and going, what is the criteria? How does this work out? In a way that's fair, but also, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if this is a platform for the world's best surfing and we don't have John Florence in his prime surfing pipe, there is a question of what are we doing? And so I'd imagine that we will see him somewhere.
Is the it makes me think, if you raise your hand as a wild card such as Kelly or John, and I'm just totally riffing here. I just thought of this. Maybe you need to raise your hand before events 9 or 10 and 11 so that we can fit you into the field in 10 and 11. How bad do you want it? Are you willing to go to Abu Dhabi and these other events to surf 2 events prior to one? It gives you a chance to sand off some rust competitively. 2, it allows you to surf 2 events before the pipe where we can feed you into the event, so you're not up against the number one surfer on tour.
Yeah, it's a good question. I got to look at the field makeup as well, because I think a lot of times over the last few years, those post-cut wild cards were used for CT surfers that maybe got hurt in the first portion of the season, but were still wanted to be in the race. So like full-time CT surfers. And I don't know if there'd be space for kind of like your wild cards there, outside of the event ones too. I think the bigger issue, and this is something that I'm working on with a few folks, and something that I think's been apparent for a while, is that where is the home for high profile CT talent once they go, yeah, I don't have the time or the interest or the body to surf 10 or 12 events a season, right? Like, because and I'd say this like outside the WSL too, it's like in the industry, et cetera. It's like, where do people go? It's like, because oftentimes they're still surfing at the highest level possible. They're, if they're world title contenders or world title holders, they're probably at peak popularity, after 15 years on tour. And it's like, well, is there a place that we can create where it's still competitive and fun, but maybe isn't the CT, right? But we still get to see them surf world-class waves or something like that. And I know there's a few kind of offshoots out there that people are testing out, but I think that's a real thing. And it's like, I would love to see them continue to compete and continue to be involved in the way that made sense.
Part of me thinks that if you're the number one surfer going into pipe and you draw John, that's just the way the cards fall.
Mm.
Again, I'm just riffing with you. I don't, Ethan Ewing versus John, Edlo versus John at pipe in round one. Sounds like a great story from the WSL. And I
Yeah.
referenced, quite frankly, yesterday's heat with Steph versus Caitlin Simmers,
Mm.
which I thought was must watch TV. And it turned out that it was. And, like, look, that's what we want. Like, I'm sorry, it sucks that you drew John, but guess what? You're on the world tour. This is your job. Go get it.
It's a great point. It's really interesting, right? Because when I started, you didn't really have world champions that were recently retired and still surfing at an elite level getting wild cards back into the event. You would have really dangerous specialists. I remember Andy drew Sean Holmes at J-Bay like 3 years in a row, and Sean was incredible. And like, Andy was calling him his nemesis or something. Probably was like on par with Kelly for him in a lot of ways. But now you're right. You've got someone like Steph who's arguably still surfing better than, maybe surfing better than she ever has. Surfing a warm water right hand point break on home and coming up against Katie kind of early in the draw. I thought that heat was really close too, and I think
Yeah.
maybe, if Katie didn't fall in that last maneuver, that score could have been juiced up a little bit and would have been a different result. But it is interesting. I think, yeah, I don't really have a great solution. I just think if you're the number one seed, you're probably like, God, that's rough. Like,
Well,
it's rough.
and I know you guys are all chewing on it and trying to figure it out. I'm just offering some thoughts because, frankly, John and Kelly, I mean, they need to be there. They need to be at Pipe. And now that Pipe Masters is back, so to speak, it already sounds like a tagline. Um, and you guys have the IP. As you know, there used to be a place for the pipe specialists, such as John and the Jamie O'Briens of the world, where they could surf. Last couple of years, it's been the Pipeline Masters, and you guys did the Billabong Pipe Pro.
Right.
Is there still going to be a permit for those guys to kind of let them have their moment at Pipe, not, off tour, not on the CT?
For sure. And there's also the Hui backdoor shootout. That permit's in January, and we've been working with them the last few years to make sure that, the surfers that want to go in it can go in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like finite resources and finite permits. And so we're stoked that we're getting that December permit back for the Pipe Masters. We still have our January permit. We'll kind of figure out what to do with that as well. I'm not sure if Vans has any plans to continue with sort of a specialty event, but I think those regional events too, like in the past, whether they were like a local trials or a low level QS event, low level being like, 3,000 or whatever, 3,000 QS event, like the Vulcan Pipe Pro and stuff like that, or even maybe in future some other events. Yeah, I think there's absolutely going to be opportunity for the local specialists to perform, and hopefully perform in a way that it does help them down the road if they are interested in continuing on a WSL QS or CS or CT tour, where it's like, oh, I performed at Pipe, I accomplished this amazing feat, which is important enough in and of itself. But it's like, if there's down the track benefit to that too, that is good for them, then we'd want to work towards that.
I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to that in a minute, but I want to ask you about, I've mentioned sort of offhandedly without thinking it through too much, which is sort of the nature of off the cuff podcasting, that judges and commentators could potentially be and do their job off site. I,
Mm.
I sort of occasionally, logistically, I believe even Jim Nantz has hosted golf tournaments while he's on site at an NFL playoff uh, event. I could be wrong on that. I actually Googled it and I didn't come up with anything, but I recall hearing him be at like the Chiefs stadium while he's hosting some other event and even saying it like, I'm doing it from here, that seems like when I'm combing through the spreadsheet in the WSL offices a way to save a ton of money. And the technology is there for whoever it is to certainly commentate just by watching the screen like we're doing at home. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we've talked about quite a lot, and our head of content, Jed Pearson, he actually comes from Fox Sports. He's been there a long time too, post acquisition. He's been there 12 or 13 years at this point. But I know that's something that he's working on pretty closely. I think anyone, either on a commentary or officiating side, would say there is no replacement for actually being there live. And I'm sure the commentators would agree, where it's like seeing it live and commentating live and being able to mix in with the surfers and understand what's going through them personally, there's no replacement for that. But I think there are efficiencies to be realized for portions of the commentary. I think we already see it. Our other language broadcasts often broadcast remotely as well, and it works really well. The officiating side's tough. I think you and I have probably been to enough surf events to know that the angle that we get from the high def broadcast, or the multiple angles, as good as it is not the same as what you're seeing live, and it's not the same as what the judges are seeing live. So that's often really important. But for example, when we've done wave pool events in the past, like they're judging off the screen because of the way that system structured for them to see the whole wave. So I don't think it's impossible. I think at the end of the day, the officiating piece is so important that I would kind of defer to our head judge Luli and our commissioners on what's best to make sure that, all right, we've done all the work to get the best surfers we can find, to go back to bugs, like get the best surfers you can find, put them in the best waves you can find, and that's the recipe to see some cool shit. It's like, we've done all that work. Let's make sure that we're officiating and kind of like interpreting what we believe the world-class surfing is in the best way possible.
I feel like there are too many surfers on tour. At one point, there was even talk, I believe, and help me out here, about there being the same number of men and women on tour. I thought there was some discussion about that. I believe if we had 16 men and 16 women and we allowed for 8 wild cards as well, we would have 24 men and 24 women. We would have crazy amount of storylines with wild cards which could upset the apple cart, so to speak. I know there's a lot, I'm sure that Christian Becerra is typing away right now, going, "Wait a minute, hold on."
I'll hear about it at the next server advisory
But what are
council.
your thoughts on this? Too many guys on tour. I think it would be trimmed down, and I specifically say that so that we can get these surfers in good swells, understanding that we have 2 or 3 days in a swell event.
Totally, that's the calculus, right? I mean, less surfers on tour, you're more nimble and you're able to take advantage of better conditions. And I mean, frankly, that went into the conversations about the removal of the non-elimination round. And I was around when we tried this. I can't remember the year. It was like 2008, 2009, right around there. And we actually, on the men's side, removed the non-elimination round. We pre-seeded everyone. It was like man on man to start. And then I think Dane lost, for round one at the Gold Coast, and then 4 weeks later lost round one at Bells, and there was like a riot like in the fandom. I may have been on there on some pseudonym, but it's like everyone's like, we've waited 2 months and we only saw him surf an hour. This is bullshit. And it's like, and we had a meeting with all the surfers in a house like at Bells, and they're like, all right, we tried it, let's get rid of it. So my view on the non-elimination, I was always colored by that experience. But I think at the end of the day, it's like, well, sometimes just the way swells work out, we have to burn great conditions on a round where no one's eliminated. Not that it's inconsequential, but it's like would you rather surf your elimination heat in those conditions, or kind of this feeder round, and then maybe have to surf your elimination round in rough conditions? And that's ultimately where the calculus came out, is like, we want to shorten the events and we want to take advantage of more better conditions during the window. The number thing too, it certainly plays into it, right? Like, we used to have 45 on tour, 48 person events. Now we're at 36.
Well, we used to have 16, as you know, top 16.
Right. Yeah. That was a little before my time, but I'm aware. But I think that's a good point. I think the balance on that too, right, is and I remember when Pat O'Connell was in, whatever we were calling the commissioner role when he was their senior vice president, the competition, whatever it was, some long title. But we had that conversation as well with the surfers, and he brought up in a really good way. He's like, well, the smaller we make the front door in terms of surfers getting onto the tour, the more limited the diversity is. And you could end up with a tour where it's 75% people from this country and no one from that country. And sometimes, like, bringing people on, even if they're coming in from the lower ranks. I mean, look at someone like an Al Cleland this year. Probably wouldn't have gotten on if the numbers were reduced, and he's performing really, really well. And there's always going to be that, just because waves and elite waves are like a finite resource, a little bit of difference, right, between the qualifying level and the CT level. And we've all known surfers that it's like, if you can just get through that qualifying level, I know you're going to thrive at this level because the waves and competition's better. But that's the balance, and I don't necessarily think the numbers we have right now are right, but I'm not sure they're wrong either, in terms of making sure we got a big enough field to see some exciting surfing. But yeah, down the track, we may end up in a space where there's less surfers on tour and we're more nimble. I think it's a little bit like a water balloon, though. Like, if you any time that we have a conversation about reducing the number of surfers on tour, where does the energy go? It's like, well, then the CS needs to be elevated, and you need to have career opportunities there as well for those surfers that aren't making the CT. So
Well,
bit of a word salad, but I feel
no,
you on the being nimble and taking advantage of the best waves during the window.
yeah, no, and I recall, as do you, when Rabbit was involved, he was heavily concerned about making sure that there was the proper amount of feeders into the system. Kiowa Belly recently gave up his spot on the championship series, this feeder, this mini tour, which feeds up into the championship tour. He stated there isn't enough money to make it worth his while. Granted, he's been on tour a long time. He's probably in his early 30s. Um, but and I realize that this question is going to be multi-layered. It's almost a societal issue. In fact, it is a societal issue. But do you sense that pro surfing is becoming so expensive to pursue that only wealthy kids from upper middle class and upper class families can pursue this dream, especially here in North America?
Yeah, I mean, well, how much time have you got, Scott? I spent a lot of time thinking about this, but I think that you know the privilege of how for probably since the beginning, the privilege of having enough time and proximity to the ocean, you know, uh, is already kind of built into surfing. But I remember having, like, my mind blown about Australian coastal real estate from the post World War II era. And someone had said, well, there's a lot of, like, government and cheap housing that's, like, right on all these beautiful beaches along the Australian coastline. And the reason is that during World War II, people were worried they were going to be invaded by the Japanese. So all the coastal property was really cheap, and you had lower income families. And so that's why you had generations of world-class Australian surfers that came from sort of relatively impoverished backgrounds, because they had the time and proximity to the ocean. And fast forward to 2025, and I'd say, like, world over, like, surfing's almost priced itself out of being surfing in a lot of ways, just because real estate's so expensive on the coastline. Having the time and the space to actually surf, or surf enough to get good enough relative to, as you pointed out, people that have a lot of money, is a real challenge, right? I mean, you look at the rise of, like, wave pools the world over, like, they're not the cheapest things either. And it is interesting, right? Because I do think, if you look at 50 years of world champions, most, if not all of them, probably came from lower income families growing up. and there's a little bit of a chicken and egg, like the ocean becomes a surrogate parent, it becomes, a place of escape, and you spend enough time there, you get really, really good. That's not to say for every, Kelly Slater, there aren't 10,000, poor people out there that had a rough time that were in similar circumstances. But I do think that's that's something where there is a hunger there. And I think if you look at the rise of the Brazilian storm over the last 2 decades, similarly, right? Like once the information age kind of flattened out access to information around board equipment and fitness and diet and technique in a way that 20, 30 years ago, the only way you'd be exposed to global world-class surfing is when they came to your beach or you had a dusty VHS. Now it's at the fingertips, right? So that kind of democratized the access to like information that can turn you into a world-class surfer. And the point of difference then became motivation, and I'd say economic motivation, which I really think is undergirding that rise in the Brazilian storm. And yeah, I don't really have an answer, but I do think that in a lot of ways, like, and this is a societal issue, but like a lot of what you and I think a lot of surf fans lionize about what made surfing special over the decades, those elements just don't exist anymore. And so we're kind of in a new frontier of like, what does that mean for surfing? Like, are these apples to apples, my hero from the 80s versus the 2020s? I don't know, I don't know.
Well,
What do you think about it, Scott?
I
Because
sort of I look to tennis. I
mm,
look to tennis. Tennis is basically a super wealthy Northeast blue blood sport. And I'm sort of
right.
generalizing. I'm not saying there aren't great tennis players from Indiana, and of course the Williams sisters are great examples of lower income heroes that rose from an impoverished situation, and their father drove them to greatness, and they drove themselves to greatness. Um, but and it doesn't mean, by the way, that the level of tennis hasn't gotten better. Those Northeast blue bloods are incredible tennis players, and there's of
Sure.
course Europeans on the same sort of economic strata. But so I don't think it's a bad thing for the sport. I just think it is what it is. It's almost like it's kind of like maybe it isn't even an issue. It is what it is. And the days of Rabbit stealing for his meals with his mom and his sisters, those days are over. Like and whatever. It's kind of interesting. Of course, Kaio was sort of a people's champion in many ways, and he lived a dream for a while, and it's time for him to move on, and that's fine too. But this
It's a
also brings up something which I think is interesting. I'm not so sure that this ISA shouldn't be the feeder for the WCT. The International Surfing Association could be the feeder. It could help you guys eliminate a ton of back end issues with these feeder tours. And I want your thoughts on that, along with, well, let's just get your thoughts on that, and then I'll go to something similar.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. Like I kind of go back to a previous comment where, surfing's not like other sports, right? Where it's like, the NFL and football, the idea of football are like one and the same. The NBA and the idea of basketball are kind of one and the same. And their relative, tiers for matriculation are all kind of like in one vertical, right? Whereas in surfing, like competitive surfing is one way to express it. There's a lot of awesome ways to express it, in free surfing and all sorts of ways. But I think when it comes to competitive surfing, I always default to the best way for everybody to succeed is to have one center of gravity, right? Where it's like you can have different entities, but it's like if there's different entities doing different competitive things and they're not interconnected, it feels like a missed opportunity. So for sure, like I'm constantly saying inside the building and pushing our team to say, let's go talk to board riders, let's go talk to the ISA, let's talk to these other competitive entities that, maybe in the past we haven't had great relationships with, or maybe we just, interpreted what competitive surfing should be, judging criteria and formats, et cetera, in a different way. But that all seems a little silly to me, because if you're a young kid coming up and you're surfing in a board riders or you're surfing in an ISA event, it's like, why wouldn't that lead you towards a WSL Pro Junior, WSL QS, or WSL CS, or WSL CT kind of pathway? And at the same time, I think a lot of those board rider entities, I think a lot of the ISA events would be stoked to have a case study and sort of a champion that came out of their system, right? Because then they can kind of cycle that back and say, so and so started at the Shelley board riders, and look at them now taking on Ethan Ewing on the CT. I just think that's
Well,
a
and
good
I think
idea.
at the, and I apologize for interrupting, but the great case study, in my opinion, is our friend from Mexico, Alan Cleland. He
Mm,
has a pretty stellar ISA background and record.
yeah, no, I think that's great. And I guess it's kind of what you're saying before about like everyone's fishing from an increasingly smaller pond, or a decreasing in size pond, in terms of historically the business model was like, the surf industry is this juggernaut that's on the road to the moon sort of thing. So they're just going to keep throwing money at us, the ISA, the ASP, the surf trips, magazines, whatever. And it wasn't always or often kind of related to like, okay, we spent this much money, how much value did we get in return? It was more just like, money's cheap, let's go, this sounds cool. Which, in fairness to them, like, money's cheap, this sounds cool, it resulted in a lot of great stuff for surfing, like in terms of products and films and events. But I think that's historically been a challenge, where it's like, all right, the ISA's over here, the WSASP's over here. We're both kind of looking at similar sponsorship to stand up our events, or similar wave venues, et cetera. That's changed so much that, and I know that like Graham and Fernando and Bob Sassoula have a really good relationship. And, we do work with the ISA as far as the Olympic qualifying piece goes as well. So I think, the more we can kind of work, not just at that level, but like even at kind of the lower amateur, the younger levels, is good for surfing.
Well, this is a great segue into what I'd like you to comment on next, which is Sophie Goldschmidt of the U.S. Skiing and Snowboard Federation is trying to take control of Olympic surfing from USA Surfing. And I'm going to quote her here. The amount of money being invested in supporting elite surfers in the United States has been flat for too long, and we think we can change that. Of course, Sophie Goldschmidt is the former CEO of the WSL. Her federation, USSS, the United States Ski and Snowboard, they expected revenues of $62 million in 25. And that's including 17.5 million just from commercial sponsorships. Her revenue has grown 66% over the past 4 years, with commercial revenue alone doubling. In contrast, USA Surfing, their tax return for 23 shows them with $600,000. This is the Olympics is a money business. That's a hard argument to sort of shoot down, the one that Sophie's bringing. They've got tons of money, which would, I guess, equate to tons of experience managing these athletes and managing these sponsorships. Um, what are your thoughts on, first, how is Sophie Goldschmidt viewed? And I know this is a loaded question. How is she viewed within the WSL building? You mentioned just now that Graham and these guys are tight with Bob and Fernando of the ISA. This is Fernando's baby, man. Uh, Tell me about Sophie Goldschmidt. What are your thoughts on her running USA Surfing?
Yeah, it's a good, you mentioned this in the text last week, and I'm like, I'll have to come up with some thoughts, because I haven't been that close to it. But yeah, I worked with Sophie for a number of years when she was the CEO of the WSL. She's super duper smart, and super duper effective. And it does feel like she's found like a really good place for herself at US Ski and Snowboard. And even the figures you rattled off there, they sound really impressive. Um, yeah, it's tough on the tension thing. It kind of reminds me of when, Nike and Target and kind of these mainstream brands were entering into surfing late 2000s, maybe, if my timeline's right. And there was a lot of like consternation in the surfing world, like the core surf brands were like, get out of here, and like probably like some of the surfers were even asking themselves like, ooh, should I actually sign with Nike? Like, is that bad for my career? It's just like, in 2025 sounds insane. But there was a real tension. And I remember going back to Meg Bernardo, like Meg Bernardo, myself, Rachel Harris, who worked with Meg, is awesome. we all had a meeting with at the time, the ASP North America surfers reps. And one of them was Mikey Todd. Can't remember the other one, I'm sorry. But we were talking about like, well, would you guys surf on QS events that were sponsored by non-endemics? Like that was the whole meeting, was about like, would you be okay with that? And I was pretty green. I'm like, I don't know what they're gonna say. And I remember, I'll never forget, like Mikey was like, we don't care who funds these events. Like, we'll surf for a tampon company. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, whoever wants to support the thing we're doing, we're into. And I'm not saying that's a one-to-one, but going back to the financials point, like in 2025, and probably through time immemorial, like if you're a professional surfer, it is not cheap. It's not cheap to travel. It's not cheap to train. It's not cheap to pay your bills. And if you're not getting, 6-7 figures from your sponsors, you start questioning like, well, what's my career path here? Like, what am I going to do for a living? And so I think surfers are naturally going to gravitate towards places where, yeah, this seems like a good place to like make money for the period of time here. That said, I think the folks at USA Surfing have stewarded that platform in a really productive way, and they've produced world-class surfers. And I will say this, like in life, and certainly in surfing, no one gets credit for catastrophe aversion, where it's like people kind of have to feel the disaster to be like, oh man, that's bad, right? But I promise you that like across these organizations, and even at US Ski and Snowboard, there's people that are dedicated to like making sure these athletes have every means possible to kind of push the boundaries of human potential, and they're averting catastrophe daily, right? And so I think the folks at USA Surfing, and again, I'm not that close to it, have done an awesome job. I don't know where this is going to land. The WSL's relationship is primarily with Fernando and Bob and the ISA, and ensuring that if they want CT surfers and world-class surfers, there's a way for them to qualify for their respective teams via the championship tour. But again, I'm pretty far away from it, Scott. What's your take on the USA Surfing versus USA Ski and Snowboard?
Well, I mean, when you look at her pitch, the fiscal pitch that she gave, she's basically saying we can support the surfer athletes in a way that USA Surfing has failed to do. But that's just dollars and cents.
Mm.
There's not a lot of salt in the building at USA Ski and Snowboarding, which I immediately go, whoa, 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 we got a problem here. We've seen this play out before.
Sure.
But I'm not sensing that they're not saying, look, I'm the salt in the building. They're saying, I'm the organization in the building. I'm your friend here. I can drive you to places you've never been before.
Mm.
And so I'm just more or less wondering if Sophie's reached out to the WSL as well, as she tries to, I guess it's a power grab on some level.
I haven't heard. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, I mean, it would make sense if she wanted to. Although, again, like the outreach is probably for her would make more sense to reach out to Fernando and Bob, and then Fernando and Bob would talk to us about it because we want to support.
I'm pretty sure she reached out to them via her, there was, as you may or may not know, there was basically, I guess the Olympic Committee was like, hey, give us your pitch. Like this was a pitch to
Right,
the,
yeah.
yeah. So, and by the way, there was a press release from ISA and from Olympic Surfing saying, hey, we're surprised that we're being attacked and we're not for this. And so there's definitely some friction.
Yeah, I mean, even going back to what you're saying before, like, and we've seen it quite a lot, but I've always felt like if surfing is going to succeed, you kind of need inside people that are flexible enough to look out, and then outside people who are flexible enough to look in. We've seen plenty like in their silos that are like, I am now in charge of surfing. I've got no interest in actual surfing. You will do what I say. And it's like, that's right. What's the head of lettuce thing in the UK where it's like, all right, let's see who lasts longer, this like head of cabbage or this person. And then on the other side, you get people that are inside of surfing that are just like, it's only core surfers, and like anyone that sends a spreadsheet my way is going to like rot in hell. And it just doesn't work, And it's like, I think that kind of respectful blending from both sides makes sense. And
Yeah.
I guess we'll see how it plays out in this instance.
Well, respectful blending is sort of a great way to describe, at least in what I'm seeing from Ryan Crosby, the new CEO of the WSL. He's done such a great job, as you mentioned, of sort of just keeping his head down and working hard and not being like a tall poppy, so to speak,
Mm.
which is a big contrast to the way that Eric Logan ran the ship. I imagine from Dirk Ziff's standpoint, the owner of the WSL, this is sort of refreshing. Do you have any insight on the way Dirk feels about Ryan Crosby?
Well, I mean, Dirk's pretty involved in the sport, and he always has been. And he's a pretty humble guy as well, and likes to be in the background. But and he's very humble about his own kind of surfing credentials. But I don't juice him because he's my boss's boss or anything. But I'm always kind of wowed at like how insightful he and Natasha are when it comes to even like core surfing things like forecasts or scoring, or even kind of like they've got a really good mind for surfing. So we're really fortunate to have them as owners. I haven't heard from him specifically on how he feels about Ryan, but I think that the way that the company's performed over the last couple of years and the way that he's managed things, it's not perfect, but it's moving in a really good direction for us to, enter into a new phase and succeed in a lot of ways and succeed for surfing. And back to Eric, like kind of said at the beginning, like we've had a few CEOs in my time. We've certainly had a couple in the post acquisition era. And I think all of them have that same goal. It's like we want to have the platform for world's best surfing succeed. They just have different takes on it. And, Eric came from a background that was like content heavy and was sort of like, bombastic CEOs like your Dana Whites, et cetera. And I think there was a lot of purchase in that, and there were a lot of wins in that. And then at the end of the day, he transitioned into a new role, and we have like a different chapter with Ryan, who you're right, like does have a different take on things. And I like that take on things just because the share of voice is opened up for more conversation about surfing and surfers, and less about kind of what I call the business of surfing. That I would say this too, and I say this to our comms team all the time, where I'm like, hey, even if it's a good business announcement, like our fans don't give a shit. You know what I mean? Like they just want like the good surfing. Like so keep the good businesses happening, but like it's choose your audience sort of thing.
I think there's something sort of underneath this that as a surf culture, if somebody paddles out into a lineup, the last thing they want is to see that the other people in the lineup don't necessarily want to see some guy come out and beating his chest and going, oh, I'm going to catch the next set wave and blah, blah, blah. They much prefer somebody that slides in underneath the pack, picks off a couple of waves, makes his way into the lineup, finds his spot, and does his thing without too much fanfare. And that's sort of the way I sense Ryan Crosby is behaving. Like he's just catching a couple of waves underneath everybody and doing his thing and ripping the waves to shreds. And before you know it, everyone's like, hey, who is this guy? Seems like a pretty good guy.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure he'd be stoked to hear that. Like, and I don't think that's off. Like, I think again, he's like, look, I run the business of surfing. Like the surfers are the talent. Like I'm here to do the job. And sometimes, and again, like we have to cattle prod him out there, but like very rarely does that mean he's forward facing. And more he just has his head down, like working on the business.
Have you ever seen him put his fins in backwards?
No, I have surfed with him, and he is a
Is he a
confident
regular
surfer.
foot or a goofy foot?
He is a regular footer.
Okay, that's a check. What type of board does he ride?
He was riding a Hypto Crypto, and then recently moved to the what's it called, like the Great White Twin Fin, I think, Firewire,
Oh, okay.
something like that. But he's a bigger guy too. Like he grew
Yeah.
up playing like hockey and football, and again, he's super humble about his own surfing. But he's an athlete. Like,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he'll be the last guy to be like, yeah, I need like the 6.0, 18 and a quarter, 2 and a quarter, and like watch this combination. He just kind of enjoys it for what it is, and yeah, he's got a good head on his shoulders when it comes
Did
to
he
his own surfing.
did he play hockey in college?
I think he did. Like I'm probably gonna screw his bio up now, but yeah, I think he did play a little bit in college.
Oh, cool. Where did he go to college? Do you know?
Oh man, you're
Yeah,
really
don't
putting me
worry
on.
about it. No, that's okay. I'm kind of I'm kind of a hockey fan, so I'm
Oh
just
yeah, you should talk to him about it. Yeah, he played growing up. I think he was in Pittsburgh, like growing up mostly, and I think he got recruited to play hockey in college.
oh, cool. Very good. Well, Dave, look, man, we've said a lot. We've had a great conversation. You were kind enough to stay with me for a whole hour here, and I really appreciate it. Is there anything that you want to say that I haven't prodded out of you?
Oh man. No, man, I really enjoyed talking to you about surfing, whether it's over coffee or on a podcast. And I feel like we hit some interesting topics. I feel like there's a lot more to chew on.
Yes.
So maybe we can come back in the future and just talk about it, whether it has to do with the WSL or not. But yeah, I'm stoked that you're happy with the direction the tour is heading. And I think there's a ton of work to do. I think that, other products we're developing or refining the ones we currently have, just so the surfers can kind of do their thing, and we're getting the best talent coming through the system is important. And yeah, no, I don't have anything else to say. Actually, no, really, before we go, I do want to, I don't know if the event will still be on by the time this comes out, but your take on the event moving to Burley Heads this year, just as a wave and the surfing we've seen, like how do you rate that compared to maybe like a comparative swell at like a Snapper Rocks on the sandbanks there?
Um, I think it's interesting. I like it, and I'll tell you why. Because no, we really haven't seen a whole lot of Burley Heads. You
Oh,
know what I mean? Like, I don't think the average surf fan is familiar with Burley Heads. I'm a big fan of it because I'm a history geek, and the
right.
whole Peter Druin man on man, 1978, I think it was, or 77. MR versus Dane Kilo. Like I like that. Burley Heads is that's right in my wheelhouse emotionally. So
Yeah.
I'm psyched on watching it, and I think we're going to get some swell. There is some wind, but it's supposed to be pretty big here coming up. So I'm a fan.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was out there last week actually. I had coffee with Bugs, and I was talking to Pat while I was there, and because I stay at like a tiny unit like at Snapper usually to save money, and I booked it before we moved the location because the bank at Snapper is truly like gone, like it's deep. And I thought, well, I'll stay down there, and I'll just keep surfing D-ball and like going up to the event when I have to. And I was talking on the phone to Pat O'Connell, and he said, what's funny is that he goes, this event was always at the Gold Coast, and it was always at Burley Heads, and because it was there, he goes, we never surfed D-ball back then. He goes, we'd either surf Burley Heads or we'd go up to Stradbroke. And he goes, we haven't run a heat there since like 2002 on the CT, right around when the Tweed River sand bypass started pumping sand at the Superbank. And since then, it's been so consistent that it's like, we're just going to stay here kind of deal. And he said, but isn't that funny? Because it's like, it's a pretty tight coastline with all these amazing waves, but it's like, for pro surfers, it's like, well, I'm not going to 15 minutes down the road to surf D-ball because I'm at Burley Heads. I'm like, it's worked out for me this trip actually, because there's very few folks out there comparatively.
Oh, good. Yeah, good stuff. You're getting yours by yourself. That's a good thing. Well, not
Well, I
by
don't no, I
yourself,
wouldn't
but
say by myself at D-ball, but
right,
as close as it gets.
right. Well, Dave, again, thanks for being a part of the Boardroom show, and we look forward to chatting with you soon, bud. Good stuff.
Yeah, right on. Thanks, Scott.
Okay.
Stay